They laughed when a millionaire with only 3 months to live adopted 5 boys from the streets. Little did they know fate would change everything. Drop your location in the comments. I love knowing where my viewers are from. Let's get into the story. The manila envelope sat unopened on Alexander Morgan's mahogany desk, casting a long shadow despite its thinness. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office on the 52nd floor, Manhattan sparkled like a jewel box, oblivious to the devastation contained in that simple folder. 3 months, Alexander whispered, finally breaking the silence that had engulfed the room since his personal physician had left. 3 months to live. The words hung in the air, as tangible as the rare artwork adorning his walls. At 58, Alexander Morgan had built an empire that spanned continents. The Morgan Investments logo crowned buildings in 12 countries. His net worth would make small nations envious, and none of it mattered now. Alexander loosened his silk tie and poured himself 3 fingers of 30-year-old scotch. The amber liquid caught the dying sunlight as he raised it to his lips. It tasted like ash. "What legacy am I leaving?" he asked the empty room. His voice, normally commanding in boardrooms, sounded hollow even to his own ears. His wife, Elizabeth, had succumbed to the same disease 5 years ago. They had never had children, always too busy building the empire, always thinking there would be time later. Now there was no more later. Alexander moved to the window, watching the tiny figures scurrying below like ants. How many of them were rushing home to families? How many had someone waiting? The thought sent a wave of loneliness crashing over him. Memories flooded back. His childhood in a cramped apartment in the Bronx. His mother working 3 jobs after his father abandoned them. The scholarship that had been his ticket out. The relentless climb to the top. He had promised himself he would never be vulnerable again, never need anyone again. And he had succeeded. Brilliantly. Terribly. His phone buzzed. Another board meeting. Another acquisition. Another billion to add, to accounts that would soon belong to distant relatives who had never bothered to know him. Alexander Morgan, master of the universe, was going to die alone. He set down his untouched drink and straightened his tie. The mask of the ruthless businessman slid back into place as he gathered his papers. But something had cracked inside him, something fundamental. He stepped into the elevator. Alexander made a silent vow. His remaining days would mean something. He just didn't know what, or how. The elevator doors closed on the empire he had built and the emptiness it contained. The charity gala had been unbearable. Alexander adjusted his bow tie as his driver navigated the late-night streets of Manhattan. His mind kept returning to the diagnosis. 3 months. The sympathetic murmurs and calculating glances from those who'd caught wind of his condition made him feel like a commodity whose stock was plummeting. "Take the next right, James," Alexander instructed suddenly. "The shorter route home." The limousine turned into a narrower street, its headlights sweeping across storefronts closed for the night. As they approached an alley between 2 buildings, Alexander glimpsed movement in the shadows. "Stop the car, sir." Just for a moment. Against his driver's concerned protests, Alexander stepped out into the December chill. The forecast had mentioned snow before morning. He approached the alley cautiously, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the pavement. 5 huddled forms became visible. Boys, using cardboard and newspapers as blankets. The oldest couldn't be more than 15, the youngest perhaps 7 or 8. They were awake instantly, alert like prey animals sensing danger. "Easy," Alexander said, raising his hands. "I'm not police." The oldest boy stood protectively in front of the others. "We ain't doing nothing wrong. This is private property, but the owner said we could stay until they start construction." Alexander noticed they were organized with their few possessions neatly arranged. There was an intelligence in their eyes that struck him, particularly the oldest and the smallest. "What are your names?" he asked. Silence. Then the oldest spoke again. "I'm Ethan. These are Tyler and Thomas." He gestured to identical boys around. 13. That's Lucas, a thin 11-year-old with artistic hands. "And Dylan," the tiny boy with enormous eyes. "Your brothers?" Not by blood, Ethan replied. By circumstance. Something stirred in Alexander, something he'd thought long dead. An impulse, irrational and powerful, gripped him. It's going to snow tonight, he said. I have a place nearby. Warm beds, hot food. The suspicion in their eyes was immediate. No strings attached, Alexander added. Just tonight, it's Christmas season after all. The boys conferred in whispers while Alexander waited. His driver watched incredulously from the car. Finally, Ethan looked up. One night, we stay together. We leave any time we want. Agreed. 20 minutes later, Alexander Morgan, who had never even owned a pet, watched 5 street boys cautiously enter his penthouse. They stood huddled together in the vast living room, looking simultaneously awed and terrified by the luxury surrounding them. The kitchen is stocked, Alexander said. Bedrooms down that hall. Bathroom has everything you need. I'll be in my study if you need anything. As he turned to leave, the smallest one, Dylan, spoke up. Why are you doing this? Alexander paused. It was a question he couldn't answer, not fully. Instead, he simply said, because I can. But as he sat alone in his study later, listening to the muffled sounds of life temporarily filling his empty home, he began formulating a plan so outrageous even he could scarcely believe he was considering it. Tomorrow, he would call his lawyers. Alexander's Manhattan mansion had always been a showcase, immaculate, pristine, and utterly lifeless. Now echoes of young voices bounced off marble floors and designer furniture. This is insane, Harold Winters, Alexander's attorney of 20 years, muttered as they watched the boys from the study doorway. The 5 children moved like a unit, never straying far from each other. Temporary guardianship is one thing, but adoption? All 5? In your condition? Alexander observed how the twins, Tyler and Thomas, examined everything with technical curiosity, how Lucas traced the patterns on an antique vase with artist's fingers, how Ethan constantly counted exits and valuables, how little Dylan absorbed every detail like a sponge. My condition is precisely why, Harold, Alexander replied. Process the paperwork. 3 days in, and tensions were high. The boys broke a priceless vase while roughhousing. Alexander snapped at them harshly. Ethan responded by organizing a silent treatment that lasted hours. On the 4th night, Alexander found Dylan attempting to pick the lock to his study. What do you think you're doing? He demanded. The small boy jumped. I wanted to see your books. You could have asked. Dylan's eyes narrowed. Adults don't usually say yes to me. The frankness stunned Alexander. He unlocked the door. Well, I'm saying yes now. The boy's face lit up as he explored the extensive library. When Alexander mentioned it was past bedtime, Dylan asked, Can I take one to read? You can read these? Ethan taught us all, Dylan said proudly. He says knowledge is better than money for survival. Alexander handed him a simplified astronomy book. Start with this one. By the end of the first week, a routine emerged. Chaotic, uncomfortable, but a routine nonetheless. The boys tested boundaries constantly. A scheduled dinner became the flashpoint. I'm not eating this, Lucas declared, pushing away perfectly prepared salmon. You'll eat what's served, Alexander said firmly. We didn't ask to come here, Ethan challenged. Yet here you are in clean clothes with a roof over your heads. Silence fell. Then Dylan spoke, his voice small. The last time someone gave us food for free, they called the cops when we were sleeping. The innocent revelation hung in the air. Alexander set down his fork. That won't happen here, he said quietly. I promise. Dylan nodded solemnly. I know. You're sick. You need us more than we need you. Alexander stared. What makes you say I'm sick? Your medicine cabinet. The way you wince sometimes. The papers you hide when we come in. Dylan shrugged. People think kids don't notice things. The other boys looked uncomfortable but not surprised. They knew. Is that why you stayed? Alexander asked, addressing them all. Pity? Ethan answered, his street-hardened eyes suddenly vulnerable. We stayed because you're the first person who didn't want something from us. even if it's just because you're dying. The brutal honesty broke something in the room. Alexander laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised even him. "Well," he said, "at least we're being honest now." That night, for the first time, the mansion felt different. Not quite a home, but no longer just a house. Alexander lay awake, listening to occasional footsteps and whispers, the unfamiliar sounds of life disrupting his perfect solitude. It was terrifying. It was wonderful. The story broke faster than Alexander had anticipated. "Terminal billionaire adopts 5 street urchins," screamed the headline on the New York Finance Tribune. By morning, his phone wouldn't stop ringing. "Ignore them," Alexander instructed his household staff as he adjusted Dylan's bow tie. All 5 boys stood uncomfortably in tailored suits that couldn't quite disguise their street-toughened bodies. "Why, do we have to go to this thing again?" Thomas asked, pulling at his collar. "Because," Alexander said patiently, "the annual Children's Hospital benefit is important, and because people are talking about us," Ethan stated flatly. Alexander met his eyes. "Yes, and I want them to see what I see." The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria glittered with Manhattan's elite. Conversations hushed momentarily as Alexander entered with his entourage of children. Then the whispers began, hardly concealed behind manicured hands and crystal champagne flutes. Morgan's lost his mind. Terminal diagnosis does strange things. Publicity stunt before he kicks the bucket. Those animals will tear through his estate. Curtis Lawson, Alexander's chief rival and CEO of Lawson Global, approached with a predatory smile. "Alexander, how charitable of you to bring your project tonight." Alexander felt Ethan stiffen beside him. "They're my sons, Curtis. Not a project." Lawson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course. Though one wonders if the Morgan Investments Board shares your paternal enthusiasm, especially given your health concerns." "My health is my business." "Oh, but a public company's leadership is everyone's business." Lawson turned to the boys. "And what do you street entrepreneurs think of high finance? Found anything worth pocketing yet?" Before Alexander could intervene, Ethan stepped forward. "Actually, sir, I've been studying Mr. Morgan's quarterly reports. Your company's debt-to-equity ratio seems concerning compared to industry standards." Silence fell around them. Lawson's face darkened. "Watch your tongue, boy. You don't belong here. Neither does most of your portfolio's performance," Ethan replied coolly. A woman in diamonds gasped. Lawson's hand twitched as if he might strike Ethan. Alexander moved between them. "My son has a talent for numbers," Alexander said, emphasizing the word son. "Perhaps you should listen." Lawson sneered. "Your sons have a talent for manipulation, clearly. Everyone knows what's happening here. You're dying, Morgan. These gutter rats have convinced you to hand over what you've built." Tyler lunged forward only to be caught by his twin. "Don't talk about him like that." The room had gone silent. All eyes were on them. "I think," Alexander said with deadly calm, "we'll be leaving early. Come, boys." As they walked through the parting crowd, little Dylan suddenly stopped and turned to Lawson and the gathered elite. "You think we're using him because he's dying," the small boy said clearly. "But you're the ones who left him alone when he got sick." The truth of it hung in the air like crystal. No one spoke as Alexander guided his new family out of the ballroom. In the limousine, Alexander expected anger, perhaps tears. Instead, the boys were quiet until Lucas finally asked, "Do you care what those people think?" Alexander considered this. "I used to, very much." "And now?" He looked at these 5 fierce, loyal children who had defended him, not his money. The realization struck him like lightning. "Now I care what you think. All of you." The boys exchanged glances, a silent communication they developed on the streets. Finally, Ethan spoke for them all. "Then we think it's us against them," he said simply. "And we're not losing." Alexander Morgan was not accustomed to failure. The humiliation at the charity gala had ignited something within him. a determination to prove that his boys deserved respect, not scorn. "We're hosting a dinner party," he announced over breakfast 1 week later. "The most influential people in Manhattan will be here." The boys exchanged skeptical glances. "Why?" Lucas asked, his artistic hands nervously rearranging his silverware. "They made it clear they don't like us." "Because," Alexander explained, "in this world, respect is earned, sometimes by proving people wrong." The next 2 weeks transformed the mansion into a training ground. Alexander hired the city's finest etiquette coach, a stern Frenchwoman named Madame Beaumont, who marched into their lives with military precision. "Back straight, Dylan. Knife on the right, Thomas. One does not reach, Tyler. One asks to pass the salt." The boys endured endless lessons on proper dining, conversation topics, and social niceties. They practiced introductions and memorized the backgrounds of expected guests. Alexander had suits custom-tailored for each of them, watching with unexpected pride as they gradually transformed, at least on the outside. "This is stupid," Ethan muttered during their final rehearsal, adjusting his cufflinks. "They'll never accept us." "It's not about acceptance," Alexander replied, surprising himself with the realization. "It's about dignity, about showing them you belong wherever you choose to be." The night of the dinner arrived. The mansion gleamed. Exquisite flower arrangements adorned every table. The world-renowned chef they'd hired had prepared a 7-course meal that would impress even the most discerning palates. 7 o'clock came, then 7:30. By 8, only 6 couples had arrived out of 30 invitations. Alexander recognized the calculated insult immediately. "Perhaps the traffic," his housekeeper suggested, but her eyes held pity. The few who did attend made their disdain evident. Conversations halted when the boys approached. Questions were directed at Alexander as if his sons were invisible. When Lucas accidentally knocked over a water glass, the snickers were barely concealed. The breaking point came during dessert. Regina Whitfield, wife of a prominent hedge fund manager, accidentally spilled red wine on Lucas's new suit. "Oh my," she said without a hint of remorse. "How clumsy of me. But then, fine fabrics are wasted on those unused to them." Alexander saw the hurt flash across Lucas's face before the boy masked it with the practiced indifference of someone accustomed to cruelty. Before he could intervene, he overheard Whitfield's husband speaking to another guest. "Morgan's little deathbed charity project is quite the spectacle, isn't it? Wonder how long it'll take these street rats to drain his accounts once he's gone." The room seemed to freeze. Alexander looked around at the sneering faces, the barely disguised contempt. Then his eyes found his boys, 5 children trying so desperately to be what others wanted, to earn a place they shouldn't have had to fight for. Something inside Alexander Morgan, the ruthless businessman who had crushed competitors without remorse, broke and reformed into something stronger. He stood tapping his glass for attention. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," he said, his voice steady. "Your presence has been educational, for my sons and for me." Confused glances circulated around the table. "You see, I invited you here thinking I needed your approval. That, my boys needed it." Alexander placed a hand on Dylan's shoulder. "I was wrong. Tonight has shown me that some of the finest suits in Manhattan cover the poorest characters." Gasps rippled through the room. "This dinner is concluded," Alexander announced. "James will show you out." After the stunned guests departed, the 6, Morgan sat in silence at the enormous dining table. "Did we fail?" Dylan asked in a small voice. Alexander looked at their dejected faces and felt a fierce protectiveness he'd never experienced before. "No," he said firmly. "They failed. They failed to see what I see." "What's that?" Thomas asked. Alexander's voice grew soft but certain. 5 extraordinary boys who survived extraordinary circumstances, who deserve extraordinary opportunities. He paused. "And we're going to create those opportunities ourselves." For the first time since entering his home, all 5 boys smiled at him simultaneously. A tiny miracle that meant more than any business deal he'd ever closed. The mansion underwent a transformation. Alexander, who had always delegated home matters to his staff, found himself deeply involved in creating spaces for his new family. The formal sitting room became a comfortable gathering place with oversized couches. The rarely used kitchen expanded to accommodate cooking lessons that all 6 of them attempted, with varying degrees of success. "This is the 3rd time we've set off the smoke alarm," Tyler laughed as they aired out the kitchen after a particularly ambitious attempt at lasagna. "The fire department knows us by name now," Thomas added, wiping sauce from his face. Even Alexander joined in the laughter, a sound that was becoming more common in the house that had known only silence for years. As the weeks passed, Alexander noticed each boy's distinct interests emerging more clearly. During a quiet afternoon in his study, he observed Ethan poring over financial reports. "You understand those?" Alexander asked, genuinely surprised. Ethan nodded without looking up. "Hey, numbers make sense, people don't." Alexander arranged for a former colleague, a mathematical prodigy turned investment guru, to tutor Ethan. The boy's aptitude stunned them both. The twins revealed their fascination with technology when Alexander caught them dismantling and reassembling his spare laptop. "We can put it back," they exclaimed in unison. "I'm counting on it," Alexander replied, then added, "There's an engineering lab in the East Wing. It's yours now." Lucas's artistic talent emerged through doodles that transformed scrap paper into works of art. Alexander hired a renowned artist to mentor him, watching with pride as Lucas's confidence grew with each sketch. For Dylan, the youngest, it was books, especially science and medicine. Alexander found him one night surrounded by medical texts from the library. "You can read these?" Alexander asked, picking up a complex anatomy book. "Most of it," Dylan replied. "The body is like a machine. If you understand the parts, you can fix what's broken." Alexander's eyebrow raised. "Is that so?" The boy nodded seriously. "Like you. You're broken, but maybe not forever." The innocent comment hit Alexander hard. As his health deteriorated, the fatigue becoming more persistent, the pain requiring stronger medication, he had begun preparations for the inevitable. His lawyers had solidified the adoption and updated his will, ensuring the boys would be cared for. But he had accepted his fate. Until now. That night, Alexander made calls to specialists around the world. By morning, a team of tutors had been assembled, not just in academics, but in each boy's specific interests. The mansion hummed with new energy as learning spaces were created and schedules arranged. "Why are you doing all this?" Ethan asked one evening, finding Alexander reviewing their educational plans despite obvious exhaustion. Alexander considered the question. 3 months ago, he would have had no answer. Now, he had 5. "Because time is precious," he said simply. "And I want to give you as much of mine as I can." What he didn't say, what he couldn't bring himself to admit, was how these 5 street-tough boys had awakened something he thought had died with his wife. Hope, purpose, the fragile belief that perhaps he had found something worth fighting for. Later that night, pain kept Alexander awake. He wandered to the kitchen for water and medication, only to freeze at the sound of hushed voices from the library. At 3 in the morning, all 5 boys should have been asleep. Silently, he approached the partially open door, prepared to scold them for breaking curfew. What he saw instead would change everything. Alexander stood silently in the doorway, anger rising at the broken curfew. The library was dimly lit, but he could see all 5 boys hunched over the large oak table, surrounded by stacks of books and papers. Medical journals, financial reports, and complex diagrams covered every surface. He stepped forward, ready to reprimand them, when Dylan's small voice stopped him. "The treatment protocol needs modification. His type of cancer responds better to this combination, see?" The child pointed to a complex medical chart that Alexander recognized from his own oncologist's office. "We'd need access to experimental treatments," Ethan replied, scribbling calculations. "That requires money, big money, which we can generate using the algorithm," Thomas said, as Tyler nodded in agreement. The market patterns are predictable if you zoom out far enough. Lucas was sketching something. Alexander could see it was a detailed diagram of what appeared to be a medical device. What is going on here? Alexander's voice cut through the room like a knife. 5 heads snapped up, faces frozen in guilt and fear. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ethan slowly stood. "We know how to save you." Alexander stared, certain he'd misheard. "What did you say?" Dylan approached cautiously, clutching a folder. "Your cancer. It's aggressive, but there's a path forward that your doctors haven't tried." Alexander looked at the folder, then at each boy in turn. "How could you possibly?" "We're not what people think we are," Ethan interrupted. "None of us." One by one, they explained. Ethan had taught himself finance by reading discarded Wall Street journals, developing an almost supernatural ability with patterns and predictions. The twins had been fixing and reprogramming discarded electronics since they were 7. Lucas could reproduce anything he saw with perfect accuracy, including complex medical illustrations. And Dylan, the youngest, had spent hours in hospital waiting rooms, reading medical texts while waiting for the free clinic to treat whatever ailments plagued them on the streets. "We found each other because we were different," Ethan explained. "Kids like us don't survive alone." Alexander sank into a chair. "So you knew who I was." "When I found you in that alley, we recognized you," Ethan admitted. "Morgan Investments. Your photo was in the business section the day before. You planned this?" Alexander felt a crushing wave of disappointment. "All of it was a calculation?" Dylan's small hand touched his. "No, we didn't plan for you to find us. But when you did..." The boy hesitated. "When you did, we saw a chance, not just for shelter, but to do something important." "Important," Alexander echoed. "Your money can fund research that would take decades otherwise," Tyler said. "And you can give us the resources to develop our ideas," Thomas added. "Ideas that could help people, like you." Lucas's voice was barely audible. Alexander looked at the work spread before him, the complex calculations, the innovative approaches, the sheer brilliance that had been hidden behind 5 pairs of wary eyes. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why try to save me? Why not just wait for the inheritance?" The boys exchanged glances. Finally, Ethan spoke for them all. "Because you're the first person who looked at us and saw something worth keeping." The simplicity of the answer broke something in Alexander's chest. These children, these brilliant, calculating, wounded children, had been planning to save him while he had been planning to die. "Show me," Alexander said, wiping unexpected moisture from his eyes. "Show me everything." As dawn broke over Manhattan, 6 figures remained hunched over the library table, their shadows merging into one as they plotted against death itself. The morning after their revelation, Alexander called an emergency meeting with his medical team. The doctors listened with polite skepticism as he outlined the alternative treatment approach, carefully omitting that it had come from a child. They promised to look into it, with the patronizing tone reserved for terminal patients grasping at straws. "They won't help," Dylan said when Alexander returned home, frustration evident. "They think you're desperate." "I am desperate," Alexander admitted, sinking into his chair. The pain had been worse lately, a constant reminder of his dwindling time. "Then we do it ourselves," Ethan declared, his street-hardened confidence unwavering. "We have the resources." Over the next week, Alexander watched in amazement as his makeshift family transformed parts of the mansion into what they called Project Phoenix. The East Wing became a research space where Dylan and Lucas worked on treatment protocols. Alexander made discreet arrangements to access experimental medications through his global connections. Meanwhile, Ethan and the twins developed a revolutionary market prediction algorithm, combining the twins' programming skills with Ethan's uncanny financial instincts. Alexander provided historical data from Morgan Investments, astounded by how quickly they identified patterns that had eluded his top analysts. For the first time since his diagnosis, Alexander felt a dangerous emotion creeping in. Hope. It couldn't last. The first sign of trouble came via a call from Diane Pembroke, chair of Morgan Investments Board of Directors. "Alexander, the board is concerned," she began without preamble. "These children, the adoption, your health. Shareholders are nervous. My personal life is not the board's concern," Alexander replied coldly. "It is when the CEO of a publicly traded company worth billions starts making erratic decisions while battling terminal illness." The second warning arrived the next day when a social worker appeared for an anonymous welfare check on the boys. Her questions were pointed, her manner suspicious. "Do you feel safe here?" she asked Dylan when she thought Alexander couldn't hear. "Safer than I've ever been," the boy answered with surprising poise. The social worker left, but Alexander recognized the threat. Someone was watching. Someone with influence. The final confirmation came during a scheduled video meeting with his executive team. His screen briefly showed an incoming email not meant for his eyes, a message from his CFO to Curtis Lawson discussing succession planning and acquisition opportunities. "They're circling like vultures," Alexander told the boys that evening. "Lawson is planning a hostile takeover the moment I'm deemed incapacitated. Or dead," Ethan added bluntly. Alexander nodded grimly. He's always wanted Morgan Investments. Now he thinks it's within reach. The twins exchanged looks. "We checked our system," Tyler said. "Someone's been trying to access the mansion's security network and your private servers," Thomas added. "Sophisticated attempts." Alexander's phone rang. His head of security. "Sir, there's been unusual activity around the residence perimeter. Surveillance vehicles, not police." After ending the call, Alexander faced his sons. "Someone doesn't like what we're doing. They don't even know what we're doing," Lucas protested. "Exactly." Alexander's face darkened. "But they suspect something. My erratic behavior threatens their plans." That night, Alexander convened a family council in the secured library. The 5 boys listened intently as he outlined the gathering threats. "We're fighting on multiple fronts now," he explained. "First, my health, which is the central battle. Second, corporate governance. They'll try to remove me as CEO, claiming I'm mentally unfit. Third, the adoption itself. They'll challenge my capacity as a guardian. And fourth," Ethan continued, "the algorithm. If they knew what we're developing." Alexander nodded. "It could revolutionize market prediction, worth billions." "They'd steal it," the twins said simultaneously. "Or destroy it," Lucas added. Dylan, who had been quietly listening, finally spoke. "We need to divide to conquer." All eyes turned to the youngest boy. "What do you mean?" Alexander asked. "You've taught us about strategy," Dylan explained. "When outnumbered, create confusion among your enemies." A slow smile spread across Alexander's face. "Divide their attention. Make them fight each other." Ethan caught on, his street-smart mind racing. The plan took shape as the night progressed. The 6 Morgans, a family forged in desperation but now bound by something stronger, mapped out their defense. Alexander would throw himself into a highly public charitable initiative, drawing attention away from their private work. Simultaneously, through carefully planted information, they would set Lawson against other potential corporate raiders, creating confusion in the predatory ranks. Most importantly, they would accelerate Project Phoenix. Dylan's experimental treatment would begin immediately, while Ethan and the twins would deploy early versions of their algorithm to generate the capital needed for more extensive research. "It's dangerous," Alexander cautioned. "For all of us, this is your last chance to walk away. I can arrange safe, comfortable lives for you regardless of what happens to me." The boys exchanged looks, that silent communication that still sometimes excluded him. Then, one by one, they placed their hands on the table. "Family doesn't walk away," Ethan said simply. Alexander placed his hand atop theirs, feeling the warmth of their small, strong fingers beneath his palm. These children who had survived abandonment, poverty, and the merciless streets of New York had chosen him. a dying man who had never understood the true value of connection until now. "Then we fight," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion, threatening to overwhelm him. "Together." None of them noticed the tiny red light blinking on Alexander's private phone, indicating that someone had been listening to every word. Morning came with a new sense of purpose. Alexander's mansion, once a showcase of wealth but devoid of life, had transformed into a hub of secretive activity. The basement level, previously used only for storage and mechanical systems, became the nerve center of what they now officially called Project Phoenix. "Security Protocol Alpha engaged," Thomas announced, his fingers flying across a keyboard. "Mansion systems isolated from external networks. Cellular dampening fields active," Tyler added. "No signals in or out except through our secured channels." Alexander watched with a mixture of pride and amazement. The twins had created a technological fortress around the mansion in just 3 days, using components ordered through various shell companies to avoid detection. "Physical security is upgraded too," Ethan reported. "I've vetted and replaced half the security team with people who have no connections to your corporate structure." "And the treatment?" Alexander asked, turning to Dylan and Lucas. Dylan spread out detailed medical charts. "Phase 1 begins today. The modified protocol attacks the cancer cells while preserving immune function." He looked up with eyes too knowing for his years. "It will make you feel worse before you feel better." "I trust you," Alexander said simply. Lucas had converted a rarely used sunroom into a treatment space. Natural light flooded the room where a medical bed now stood, surrounded by equipment that looked both familiar and strangely modified. "The delivery system is customized," Lucas explained, pointing to his intricate diagrams. "Standard protocols, waste medication on healthy tissue. This targets only affected areas." Alexander reclined on the bed, rolling up his sleeve for the first infusion, as Dylan prepared the medication with precision that would impress any nurse. Alexander reflected on the absurdity of placing his life in the hands of a child who should be playing with toys instead of calibrating cancer treatments. "Ready?" Dylan asked. Alexander nodded, feeling the cool liquid enter his veins. "While I'm undergoing treatment, Ethan will represent me at the office. The board can't object to me mentoring my son in the business." The treatment was brutal. For the next 3 days, Alexander drifted in and out of consciousness, his body at war with both the cancer and the aggressive therapy. The boys took shifts at his bedside, monitoring his vitals and adjusting medications. Through the fog of pain and medication, Alexander heard their voices, sometimes arguing over treatment parameters, sometimes reading financial reports aloud, sometimes simply talking to him about their hopes and fears. On the 4th day, Alexander awoke to find all 5 boys asleep in various uncomfortable positions around his room. Despite his weakness, he smiled. When had these street-hardened children become the center of his world? As the first phase of treatment concluded, the financial aspect of Project Phoenix accelerated. Ethan had been making daily appearances at Morgan Investments, absorbing information like a sponge while discreetly gathering intelligence on Lawson's takeover plans. "He's approaching key shareholders," Ethan reported during their evening strategy session, "offering premium buyouts conditional on board reorganization." Translation: "Get rid of me," Alexander said, still weak but clear-headed. Meanwhile, the EI algorithm is exceeding expectations, Tyler announced proudly. "We've generated an 18% return on the test portfolio in just 10 days. Thomas pulled up complex graphs on their secure server. "The pattern detection is working. We can see market shifts before they happen." "How long until we can deploy at full scale?" Alexander asked. 2 weeks, the twins said in unison. "Maybe less." That night, as Alexander reviewed their progress from his bed, he heard a soft knock. Eleanor Hayes, his executive assistant of 20 years, entered carrying files. "The documents you requested, sir," she said, placing them beside him. Her eyes lingered on the medical equipment surrounding his bed. "The board is asking questions. Lawson is making moves." "Let him," Alexander replied. "Everything is proceeding as planned." Eleanor hesitated. Is it true? These children, they're actually helping with your treatment? Alexander studied the woman, who had been his most trusted employee for 2 decades. They're more than helping, Eleanor. They're saving my life. Her expression remained unreadable. I hope you know what you're doing, Alexander. After she left, an uneasy feeling lingered. Alexander reached for his secure phone to text Ethan, only to find it missing from his bedside table. The feeling of unease deepened into alarm. Alexander's missing phone triggered an immediate security protocol. The twins activated tracking systems, while Ethan interviewed each staff member who had access to the treatment room. Nothing, Ethan reported, frustration evident in his voice. The tracking shows it's still in the mansion, but we've searched everywhere. Could it be malfunctioning? Alexander asked, still weak from his treatment. Our tech doesn't malfunction, Tyler stated with absolute confidence. The answer came at dawn. Lucas, who had been monitoring the mansion's modified security cameras, burst into Alexander's room. You need to see this, he said, placing a tablet in Alexander's hands. The footage showed Eleanor Hayes entering Alexander's room while he slept. She took his phone, photographed documents related to Project Phoenix, and replaced everything carefully before leaving. When was this? Alexander asked, his voice barely a whisper. Last night. After her visit, Lucas answered. There's more, Dylan added, stepping forward. The secure server shows someone accessed our treatment protocols from inside the mansion. Alexander closed his eyes briefly. 20 years of loyalty, or so he had thought. Find her. Now. They discovered Eleanor in her office at Morgan Investments, calmly working as if nothing had happened. When security escorted her to a private conference room where Alexander waited, her composure never faltered. Why? Alexander asked simply. Eleanor's professional mask finally cracked, revealing bitter resentment. 23 years, Alexander. I've given you 23 years of my life, and I've compensated you generously. Money? She laughed harshly. I didn't want just money. I wanted recognition. Partnership. A place at your side. Her voice hardened. Then you bring in these street urchins. Make them your heirs. Give them access to everything I worked decades for. The betrayal cut deep. But Alexander kept, his voice steady. Who are you working with, Lawson? She smiled coldly. Curtis values loyalty and talent. He's promised me executive vice presidency after the acquisition. And my treatment information? My personal medical details? Insurance, she replied. Proof of your mental instability. Dying billionaire trusts street children with experimental medical treatments. The board will remove you by the end of the week. Alexander leaned forward. You've made a serious miscalculation, Eleanor. These street children are more brilliant and loyal than you could comprehend. Her confidence wavered slightly. It's too late. Lawson has everything he needs. Your little family experiment is over. We'll see, Alexander replied, signaling for security. Until then, your employment is terminated. A severance package will follow, contingent on non-disclosure agreements. After she was escorted out, Alexander returned home to find the boys implementing containment protocols. The twins had already neutralized the security breach, while Ethan assessed the financial damage. She sent Lawson everything, Ethan reported, grimly. The treatment protocols, early algorithm designs, our security setup. How bad? Alexander asked. Bad enough, Dylan said. The treatment timeline is compromised. We need to accelerate everything. Alexander looked at their worried faces. Children who should be playing sports or video games, not fighting corporate espionage and terminal illness. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was he being selfish, dragging them into his battles? As if reading his thoughts, Lucas spoke up. Don't even think about giving up. We knew the risks, Ethan added firmly. And we've faced worse odds on the streets, Thomas said. Tyler nodded in agreement. Besides, she made a critical error. What's that? Alexander asked. Dylan smiled slightly. She stole incomplete data. We've been working on decoy protocols while developing the real treatment separately. For the first time since discovering the betrayal, Alexander felt a glimmer of hope return. These extraordinary children continued to surprise him. Then we counterattack, he declared immediately. The morning after Eleanor's betrayal, Alexander Morgan collapsed. The experimental treatment, combined with stress and his already weakened state, proved too much. Paramedics were called, but the boys insisted on a private medical facility rather than a public hospital, one where they could maintain security and continue their modified protocols. "Sir, I strongly advise against this," Alexander's personal physician argued as he was settled into a private wing of an exclusive medical center. "These unconventional treatments are working," Dylan interrupted, holding up Alexander's latest blood work. "Cancer markers down 18% in 10 days. The doctor stared at the small boy in disbelief. "That's impossible." "Improbable," Dylan corrected. "Not impossible." With Alexander temporarily incapacitated, the boys implemented their contingency plan. Ethan assumed leadership, addressing the crisis with a maturity far beyond his 15 years. "We need to split responsibilities," he told his brothers in Alexander's hospital room. "I'll handle Morgan Investments and keep Lawson at bay. Tyler and Thomas secure our digital infrastructure. Lucas manage public perception. Dylan focus entirely on Alexander's treatment." Each boy threw himself into his designated role. Ethan, dressed in a custom-tailored suit that couldn't quite hide his street origins, marched into Morgan Investments' executive floor. The board members who had been plotting Alexander's removal found themselves facing a teenager with an uncanny grasp of their business and the legal protections Alexander had put in place. "Mr. Morgan has granted me limited power of attorney during his treatment," Ethan announced, sliding impressive legal documents across the table. "Any attempt to remove him as CEO will trigger immediate litigation and a freeze on all executive stock options." Meanwhile, the twins worked round the clock to solidify their digital defenses while simultaneously refining the market prediction algorithm. They discovered that Eleanor's betrayal had an unexpected silver lining. Lawson's technical team was now focused on deciphering the decoy algorithm, wasting valuable resources. Lucas, with his artistic talents, created a carefully crafted public narrative. Working with Alexander's PR team, he released strategic updates about Alexander's routine treatment and the ongoing mentorship of his remarkable adopted sons. Photographs showing the boys visiting children's shelters and participating in community outreach generated a wave of positive coverage that countered Lawson's whisper campaign about Alexander's competency. Dylan barely left Alexander's side. When not adjusting treatment protocols, he read medical journals and consulted discreetly with specialists around the world who had been carefully vetted and generously compensated for their confidentiality. The boy's extraordinary medical intuition, combined with boundless determination, began yielding results even the skeptical medical staff couldn't ignore. 1 week into the hospitalization, Alexander opened his eyes to find all 5 boys asleep in his room, surrounded by laptops, papers, and half-eaten meals. Despite his weakness, he smiled. This was what family looked like: messy, devoted, unrelenting in the face of challenges. "Progress report," he whispered hoarsely. Dylan jerked awake instantly. "Alexander, your markers are down 30% now. The modified protocol is working, better than expected." The others stirred, relief visible on their exhausted faces. "And Lawson?" Alexander asked. Ethan stepped forward. "Contained for now. He's making moves, but we've countered each one. The board is split." "The algorithm?" The twins exchanged proud glances. "Fully operational," Tyler announced. "We've already generated enough capital to fund your treatment for years if necessary." "And public opinion?" Alexander turned to Lucas. "Shifting in our favor," Lucas reported. "Your community initiatives are gaining traction. People are questioning Lawson's motives." Alexander studied their faces, these children who had become his reason to fight, his legacy, his family. "You've done exceptionally well, better than I could have." "We learned from the best," Ethan replied simply. As Alexander began his slow recovery, a new determination took hold. This was no longer just about surviving his illness or protecting his company. This was about proving that family, even one forged in unlikely circumstances, could withstand any storm. 2 weeks after Alexander's hospitalization, as he grew stronger daily, financial markets around the world began to shudder. What started as minor fluctuations quickly escalated into dramatic downturns across multiple sectors. "It's happening exactly as the algorithm predicted," Ethan explained, spreading charts across Alexander's bed in the private medical suite. A perfect storm of overvalued tech stocks, energy sector vulnerabilities, and banking instability. Alexander studied the data, impressed by the precision of the twins' predictive model. "And our positions?" "Protected," Tyler confirmed. "We moved assets to safety 72 hours ago." "Lawson?" Alexander asked. Thomas grimaced. "Exposed, massively. He's leveraged to the hilt in exactly the wrong sectors." Wall Street was in chaos. Financial networks broadcast scenes of panic as investors watched fortunes evaporate. The Morgan Investments offices became an island of eerie calm amid the storm, with Ethan directing operations from Alexander's office with preternatural confidence. "Juvenile Wizard of Wall Street," one financial program called him, as cameras captured the teenager conferring with seasoned executives 3 times his age. By the 3rd day of market turmoil, Alexander was strong enough to make brief appearances at the office, carefully stage-managed by Lucas to project strength while not overtaxing his recovering body. "Lawson Global is requesting an emergency meeting," his new assistant informed him. "Mr. Lawson specifically." Alexander exchanged glances with Ethan. "Schedule it for tomorrow. Here, not their offices." Curtis Lawson arrived with none of his usual bravado. His custom suit couldn't hide the strain of sleepless nights and mounting losses. Behind him followed 3 other executives who had once mocked Alexander's adopted family, all looking equally desperate. "Alexander," Lawson began, attempting to sound casual, "this market situation is unprecedented." "Is it?" Alexander replied mildly. "Our analysts predicted this correction weeks ago." Lawson flinched at the word correction, a massive understatement for what was effectively a crash decimating his company. "We need to discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement," Lawson continued. "An emergency capital infusion. A partnership, perhaps." "Partnership?" Ethan echoed incredulously. "After you attempted a hostile takeover? After you used stolen information?" Lawson's face darkened at being addressed by a teenager, but desperation kept his tone civil. "Business is business. We've all made aggressive moves at times." Alexander leaned forward. "Let me understand. You want me to save the company of the man who tried to destroy mine? Who used my illness as leverage? Who called my sons street rats? The market won't recover for months." One of the other executives interjected desperately. "By then, we'll be insolvent, thousands of jobs lost, retirement funds wiped out." Alexander turned to Ethan. "What does our algorithm predict for companies that implement proper risk management and ethical governance?" Ethan didn't miss a beat. "Recovery within 8 weeks. Potential for significant growth in the right sectors by quarter's end." The silence in the room was deafening. Finally, Alexander stood. "Gentlemen, I'll consider assistance on one condition." "Name it," Lawson said quickly. Alexander smiled. "My sons will explain the terms. I suggest you listen carefully." As Alexander stepped out to take a scheduled medication that Dylan insisted couldn't be delayed, he heard Ethan begin outlining conditions that would reshape Manhattan's financial landscape and the lives of countless vulnerable young people throughout the city. The irony wasn't lost on Alexander. The charity case street children were now determining the fate of the very elites who had mocked them. And they were doing it not with vengeance, but with vision. The terms were laid out with precision that impressed even Alexander. Ethan, with support from his brothers, had crafted conditions that went far beyond simple financial bailouts. 50% of board seats at each rescued company must be allocated to individuals with experience in social services or education, Ethan explained. To the assembled executives the following day, a minimum of 30% of annual profits will fund programs for at-risk youth. Impossible, Lawson sputtered. Our shareholders would never. Your shareholders are currently losing everything, Thomas interrupted flatly. This offers them recovery. Tyler continued. Each company will establish apprenticeship programs offering pathways to employment for youth from disadvantaged backgrounds, and full college scholarships for qualified applicants, Lucas added. Dylan, the youngest, spoke last. Plus funding for medical research focused on treatments for traditionally underfunded diseases affecting vulnerable populations. The executives looked stunned at the comprehensive demands coming from children they had once dismissed. Alexander watched with quiet pride as his sons conducted themselves with a maturity and vision that put the so-called business leaders to shame. You have 24 hours to decide, Ethan concluded. After that, our offer expires. When the executives departed, Alexander gathered his family in his private office. You realize what you're doing? He asked them. You're not just saving companies, you're changing systems that have existed for generations. Systems that failed us, Ethan replied simply, and thousands like us. Later that evening, as they returned to the mansion, Alexander found Dylan, sitting alone in the library, unusually quiet. What's troubling you? Alexander asked gently. Dylan looked up from the medical journal he'd been studying. These people were cruel to us, they laughed at us, called us names. Yes, Alexander agreed. They did. And now we have the power to watch them fail, to let them experience what it's like to have nothing. The small boy's voice held no vindictiveness, only a genuine ethical query. Wouldn't that be justice? Alexander sat beside him. Perhaps. But is justice what we're seeking? The other boys had gathered in the doorway listening. What are we seeking then? Lucas asked. Alexander looked at each of them. These extraordinary children who had already experienced more hardship than most adults. That's the real question, isn't it? Revenge is easy. Transformation is harder. We could do both, Tyler suggested. Help them, but make it hurt. We could, Alexander agreed. The question is, who would that make us? A heavy silence fell. Finally, Ethan spoke from the doorway. On the streets, we had a choice every day. Become what hurt us or become something better. He stepped into the room. I vote we choose better. One by one, the others nodded in agreement. The next morning, the executives returned with signed agreements accepting all conditions. As papers were exchanged, Lawson approached Alexander privately. I don't understand, he admitted. You could have destroyed us. After what I tried to do to you, what I said about these children, why help us at all? Alexander glanced across the room where his sons were reviewing documents with the legal team. I had excellent teachers, he replied simply. As Lawson left, thoroughly humbled, Alexander felt a strange lightness. His body was still fighting cancer, still vulnerable, but his spirit had never been stronger. That night, the Morgan family celebrated, with pizza in Alexander's study, a far cry from the formal dinners of his previous life. To the future, Alexander toasted with his glass of sparkling water, clinking it against the boys' sodas. To family, Dylan corrected with a smile. The following weeks brought remarkable transformations. The financial crisis began stabilizing exactly as the algorithm had predicted. Morgan Investments not only weathered the storm but emerged stronger, guiding other companies toward recovery through the conditional partnerships Ethan had orchestrated. Manhattan's elite watched in fascination as the terms of these agreements took effect. Board meetings that once focused solely on profit margins now included discussions of apprenticeship programs and scholarship initiatives. Corporate offices opened their doors to young people from backgrounds similar to the Morgan boys. It's working better than we anticipated, Ethan reported during their weekly family meeting. The dining room table was covered with reports showing the impact of their initiatives. Companies are finding that these programs actually improve their bottom line through innovation and community goodwill. And the medical research funding is yielding results, Dylan added excitedly. 3 new clinical trials have been approved based on our model. Most remarkably, Alexander's health continued to improve. The experimental treatment protocol had reduced his cancer markers by over 60%. His doctors, initially skeptical, now documented every aspect of his case for medical journals. They're calling it the Morgan Protocol, Dylan said proudly. It could help thousands of patients with similar conditions. Eleanor Hayes made an unexpected return one afternoon requesting to see Alexander. She stood awkwardly in his office, a shadow of her former confident self. I made a terrible mistake, she admitted. Lawson promised everything, then abandoned me when his company began failing. Alexander studied her, remembering 20 years of loyal service before her betrayal. What do you want, Eleanor? A chance to make amends, she replied softly. Any position. I'll start at the bottom if necessary. Alexander turned to Ethan, who had been silently observing. What do you think? Ethan considered carefully before answering. Everyone deserves a second chance, but trust must be earned. Alexander nodded. There's a position coordinating our new youth programs. It's demanding work with troubled teenagers. Nothing like your previous role. Eleanor's eyes widened slightly, then she nodded. I accept. Thank you. As spring arrived in Manhattan, the Morgan family found themselves at the center of a quiet revolution. Financial publications that had once mocked Morgan's charity case now analyzed the innovative approaches his remarkably gifted sons were bringing to business and philanthropy. The tide had turned, not through force, but through vision and perseverance. 1 year to the day after Alexander Morgan received his terminal diagnosis, he stood at the podium of the newly inaugurated Morgan Foundation for Young Innovators. The grand building, once a neglected warehouse in a struggling neighborhood, now gleamed with innovation labs, teaching spaces, and housing for youth in transition. When I received my diagnosis 12 months ago, Alexander began, his voice strong. Despite the emotion underlying it, I believed I was facing an ending. Instead, I found a beginning. The audience, a remarkable mix of business leaders, medical professionals, and young people from all backgrounds, listened in rapt attention. In the front row sat 5 boys in matching navy suits, watching with pride as the man they had saved told their story. Medical science will tell you my recovery was due to an innovative treatment protocol, Alexander continued. Financial analysts will attribute Morgan Investments' remarkable growth to predictive algorithms and strategic partnerships. Both are correct but incomplete. He paused, looking directly at his sons. What truly saved me, what transformed everything, was finding a family in the most unexpected place. 5 extraordinary young men who saw beyond my wealth to my emptiness, beyond my power to my vulnerability. The Foundation's inaugural ceremony marked the culmination of their remarkable journey. The Morgan Protocol, as Dylan's cancer treatment became known, was now helping patients worldwide. The twins' algorithm had revolutionized market forecasting, while funding social initiatives through its profits. Lucas's artistic vision had shaped the Foundation's design, creating spaces where creativity could flourish regardless of background. Ethan had become Alexander's true partner in business, bringing fresh perspectives that changed corporate culture from within. After the ceremony, as guests mingled in the Foundation's central atrium, Eleanor Hayes approached with a group of teenagers, her first cohort from the street outreach program she now led. They have something to show you, she said softly to Alexander and the boys. One girl stepped forward nervously. We developed this app to help kids find safe places and services. She demonstrated the program on her tablet. It works offline, too, for those without reliable connections. Alexander watched as his sons immediately engaged with the teens, offering suggestions and encouragement with the natural ease of those who truly understood. There was no condescension, no distance, only connection between young people who recognized each other's struggles and strengths. Later that evening, in the privacy of their home, the Morgan family gathered in the library where it had all begun. 1 year ago, The board approved your nomination unanimously, Alexander told Ethan. You'll be the youngest executive director in the foundation's history. Are you sure? Ethan asked. People will talk. Alexander smiled. Let them. The results will speak for themselves. Dylan approached with Alexander's latest medical results. Full remission, he announced proudly. Officially confirmed. So what? Now? Lucas asked. We've done everything we planned. Not everything, Alexander replied thoughtfully. There are other children out there like you. Other possibilities waiting to be discovered. A new project? The twins asked simultaneously, eyes lighting up. Alexander looked around at these extraordinary boys who had entered his life when he thought it was ending, who had taught him that true legacy wasn't measured in buildings or bank accounts but in lives transformed. No, he said with a smile.
Towering glass headquarters of Meridian Enterprises gleamed in the morning sunlight as Emma Harrison adjusted her backpack and stared up at the 50-story building. At just 7 years old, she stood barely 4 feet tall in her neatly ironed blue dress and white cardigan, her special occasion outfit that Mom had laid out the night before. You can do this, Emma, she whispered to herself, clutching the worn leather portfolio that contained her mother's resume. Her honey-blonde pigtails bobbed as she nodded with determination. Inside the lobby, executives in tailored suits moved with purpose across polished marble floors. Emma approached the reception desk, standing on tiptoes to see over the counter. Excuse me, she said, her voice small but clear. I have a 9 o'clock appointment with Mr. Alexander Reynolds. The receptionist, Diane according to her nameplate, looked up from her computer with a bewildered expression. I'm sorry, sweetie, are you lost? Where are your parents? Emma straightened her shoulders. My mom is Rebecca Harrison. She has an interview for the project manager position. She placed the portfolio on the counter. I'm here in her place. Diane's confusion deepened. That's not how interviews work, honey. Your mother needs to come herself. She can't, Emma's voice wavered slightly. She's in the hospital. They took her last night when she couldn't breathe right. But she really needs this job. A tall man, in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, had paused nearby, his attention caught by the unusual conversation. Alexander Reynolds, CEO of Meridian Enterprises, was known throughout Chicago's business community for his ruthless efficiency and brilliant strategic mind. What he wasn't known for was changing his schedule for anyone. Diane, what's the situation here? His deep voice carried across the lobby. Mr. Reynolds, this little girl says she's here for the project manager interview in place of her mother. Reynolds approached, studying Emma with piercing blue eyes. At 45, his salt-and-pepper hair and commanding presence normally intimidated seasoned executives. A young lady, what's your name? Emma Harrison, sir, she replied, meeting his gaze directly. My mom taught me it's important to look people in the eyes when you speak to them. A hint of amusement flickered across Reynolds's face. And where exactly is your mother? Northwestern Memorial Hospital. She has pneumonia, but the doctors say she'll be okay in a few days. Emma's small fingers unzipped the portfolio. I brought her resume and her certificates. She stayed up all night working on her presentation before she got sick. Reynolds glanced at his watch, then back at the determined child. Against all logic and corporate protocol, he found himself intrigued. Emma Harrison, he said, I've conducted over 5,000 interviews in my career, but this is certainly a first. He extended his hand. Come up to my office. Let's hear what your mother had prepared. Diane's mouth fell open as Reynolds guided Emma toward the executive elevator. Sir? Emma said as the doors closed. Mom says I'm too young to drink coffee, but I know how to make it if you'd like some. For the first time in years, Alexander Reynolds laughed genuinely. He had no idea this unexpected meeting would change everything. Alexander Reynolds gestured for Emma to take a seat in the plush chair across from his expansive desk. The morning. Sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a wall of achievements and business magazine covers, featuring his stern face. So, Emma, he said, watching as she carefully arranged her mother's portfolio on her lap. Tell me about your mother's qualifications. Emma opened the leather binder with practiced care. Mom has been a project manager for 8 years. She worked at Westlake Solutions until they closed last month. Her small finger traced the resume. She has a PMP certification and an MBA from Northwestern. Reynolds raised an eyebrow, impressed by the child's vocabulary. And why does your mother want to work at Meridian? Because we need the health insurance, Emma answered honestly, and because she says your company does important work that helps people. The directness of her response caught Reynolds off guard. Most candidates danced around compensation discussions with rehearsed speeches about company culture and growth opportunities. Mom's really good at her job, Emma continued, pulling out a folder of project completion reports. These are her success stories. She stayed up making this presentation even though she was getting sick. Reynolds flipped through the meticulously prepared materials, noting Rebecca Harrison's impressive track record. Who's taking care of you while your mother is in the hospital? Emma's expression faltered slightly. Mrs. Winters from next door. Checked on me this morning, but she's really old. I can take care of myself. I make my own lunch for school. A heaviness settled in Reynolds' chest. Where is your father? He left when I was a baby. Mom says he wasn't ready to be a dad. Emma shrugged as if discussing the weather. It's just us, but we're a good team. Reynolds studied the child before. Him, poised, articulate, and carrying responsibilities far beyond her years. Something about her determination stirred long dormant memories. One moment, he said, pressing his intercom. Janet, cancel my morning meetings. His assistant's shocked voice came through the speaker. Sir, you have the board presentation at 11. Reschedule it, and find out which doctor is treating Rebecca Harrison at Northwestern Memorial. Emma's eyes widened. Are you going to visit my mom? We are, Reynolds replied, standing. I need to meet the woman who raised such an extraordinary representative. As they rode the elevator down, Emma looked up at him curiously. Mr. Reynolds, why are you helping us? Mom says busy, important people don't usually have time. The question pierced him unexpectedly. Why indeed? Reynolds had built his reputation on efficiency and results, not compassion. Let's just say you've managed to do what most of my executives can't. Get my full attention. Emma smiled, revealing a missing front tooth, and slipped her small hand into his. The simple gesture of trust stunned him. Neither realized this moment would be the first step in healing wounds they didn't know they shared. Northwestern Memorial Hospital bustled with activity as Alexander Reynolds and Emma walked through the main entrance. The CEO looked starkly out of place in his bespoke suit among the medical staff in scrubs, but he moved with the same authority he commanded in boardrooms. Room 317, the nurse at the station directed after checking her computer. But sir, visiting hours don't start until... Reynolds slid his business card across the counter. I need to speak with Ms. Harrison about an urgent business matter. Emma led the way, navigating the corridors with familiar ease that troubled Reynolds. How many times had this child walked hospital halls alone? They found Rebecca Harrison propped up in bed, her chestnut hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, an IV line in her arm. Though clearly ill, her face pale and dark circles beneath. Her eyes, her resemblance to Emma was striking. Emma? Rebecca's voice was hoarse. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be with Mrs. Winters. Her eyes widened as she noticed Reynolds. Oh my God, Mom, this is Mr. Reynolds. I went to your interview and he brought me to see you. Rebecca's face drained of what little color it had. You did what? Reynolds stepped forward. Miss Harrison, your daughter made quite an impression. She presented your portfolio with remarkable poise. I am so sorry. Rebecca struggled to sit up straighter, mortification evident. Emma, we talked about this. You were supposed to call the company to reschedule, not go there yourself. But you worked so hard on your presentation, Emma protested, and we need the job. The raw honesty silenced the room. Reynolds pulled a chair beside the bed. Ms. Harrison, your daughter mentioned, you were at Westlake until recently? Rebecca nodded, still bewildered by the situation. Yes, I was there for 5 years before the acquisition and downsizing. Your portfolio is impressive. Why haven't you secured a position elsewhere with your qualifications? Rebecca glanced at Emma, hesitating. It's complicated. Single parent, no family support system. Most employers see that as a liability. They ask if I'll miss work when Emma gets sick, she continued, her voice strengthening with frustration. They never directly say it, but their concerns become clear. 8 interviews, 8 rejections in 2 months. Reynolds watched as Emma climbed onto the bed, instinctively checking her mother's IV line with the familiarity of someone who had done it before. The medical bills aren't helping, Rebecca admitted quietly. Pneumonia couldn't have come at a worse time. A memory surfaced, in Reynolds' mind, one he'd long suppressed. A woman, much like Rebecca, struggling alone, determined to provide despite overwhelming odds. "Miss Harrison," Reynolds said, his decision already forming. "How soon can you recover?" "The doctor says I can leave tomorrow if my oxygen levels improve, but I won't be at full strength for a week. Then we'll conduct your official interview next Monday." In the meantime, he reached into his jacket, producing a business card. "Have the hospital billing department contact this number." Rebecca stared at the card. "Mr. Reynolds, I can't accept. Consider it an advance. Meridian takes care of its people." As they left, Emma whispered, "Thank you for helping my mom." Reynolds wondered why her gratitude felt more valuable than his last $1 million deal. For the next 5 days, Emma became a fixture at Meridian Enterprises. With Rebecca's reluctant permission, after Reynolds arranged for a car service and proper supervision, Emma spent her afternoons in an empty corner office near Reynolds' suite, doing homework and occasionally shadowing various departments. "Your operating margins could improve by reorganizing your supply chain," Emma announced on Wednesday afternoon, looking up from her math homework as Reynolds stopped by to check on her. He couldn't help but smile. "Is that so? And where did you learn about operating margins?" "Mom explains her work to me. She says it helps her think better when she talks it out." Emma tapped her pencil against her notebook. "Also, your receptionist Diane gives me business magazines when I get bored." Reynolds leaned against the doorframe. "Most 7-year-olds read comic books. I read those too. Batman is my favorite. Because he helps people and doesn't need superpowers." An unexpected laugh escaped him. A pragmatist already. By Thursday, Reynolds' executive team had noticed their CEO's unusual behavior. Janet, his assistant of 15 years, observed him, checking his watch before Emma's scheduled arrival each day. "She reminds you of someone," Janet remarked, placing budget reports on his desk. Reynolds stiffened. "She's a child with remarkable potential. That's all. If you say so." Janet had been with him long enough to recognize the shadows that occasionally darkened his eyes. "The board is asking questions about your cancelled meetings. The board can direct their questions to me," he replied curtly. Later that afternoon, Reynolds found Emma in the break room, charming the marketing team with her insights on their latest campaign. "Kids at my school would like the colors more if they were brighter," she was saying as the marketing director took notes. "Miss Harrison," Reynolds interrupted, "I believe it's time for your appointment." It had become their ritual, a daily review of her mother's recovery and a discussion about what Emma had learned at Meridian that day. In his office, Emma settled into what had become her chair. "Mom's coming home tomorrow. The nurse said her lungs sound much better." "That's excellent news," Reynolds replied, sliding a chocolate milk across the desk, another part of their routine. "Will you still want to see me after Mom starts working?" "Here?" Emma asked suddenly, her eyes serious over the rim of her glass. The question caught him off guard. "What makes you think I wouldn't?" Emma shrugged, looking down. "Dad didn't want to see me anymore. Sometimes people just stop wanting kids around." The simple statement struck Reynolds like a physical blow. In his 45 years, he'd faced hostile takeovers, market crashes, and betrayals by trusted colleagues, yet nothing had prepared him for the disarming honesty of a 7-year-old. "Emma," he said carefully, "some people leave because of their own failings, not because of anything you did." He hadn't meant to share the photograph that day. It had remained locked in his desk drawer for nearly 2 decades. Yet something compelled him to open the drawer and remove the silver frame. "This was my daughter," he said, turning the frame toward Emma. Her name was Lily. Emma studied the photo of a smiling toddler with Reynolds's blue eyes. "Was? Where is she now?" Reynolds's voice grew distant. She and her mother died in an accident a long time ago. Is that why you're sad sometimes when you look at me? The question hung in the air like crystal, fragile and perfectly clear. Absolutely not. Victoria Sloan, Meridian's HR director, stood with arms crossed in Reynolds' office Friday morning. I've reviewed Rebecca Harrison's application. While her qualifications are adequate, her situation presents significant liability concerns. Reynolds continued reviewing documents, his expression impassive, elaborate. Single mother, no family support, recent medical issues. Victoria ticked off on manicured fingers. She's missed work repeatedly at previous positions due to childcare emergencies. The statistical probability of attendance problems is high. Reynolds set down his pen. Have you reviewed her performance evaluations? Yes, consistently exceeds expectations, Victoria conceded. But that doesn't outweigh the practical concerns. We have equally qualified candidates without her. Complications. Complications? Reynolds' voice cooled several degrees. An intelligent, dedicated professional who successfully manages both her career and raising a remarkably well-adjusted child strikes you as complicated. Victoria shifted uncomfortably. Alexander, this isn't like you. The board is already questioning your judgment over this. Unusual interest. There are rumors. Rumors don't concern me, results do. He handed her Rebecca's portfolio. Her project management methodology saved Westlake $3 million last year. That's the only relevant factor. Later that afternoon, James Whitfield, Reynolds' oldest friend and Meridian's CFO, closed the office door behind him. Alex, we need to talk. Reynolds glanced up from his computer. If this is about Rebecca Harrison, it is, James confirmed, settling into a chair. But not for the reasons you think. He studied his friend's face. This isn't just about finding a qualified project manager, is it? Reynolds' jaw tightened. Her qualifications speak for themselves. I've known you for 30 years, James said quietly. Not since Caroline and Lily have I seen you like this. Don't, Reynolds warned. James continued gently. You've built walls so high that the board calls you the machine behind your back. Then this child walks in, and suddenly you're cancelling meetings and arranging hospital payments. What's your point, James? My point is that you need to be careful, not just professionally, but personally. James leaned forward. If you're seeing ghosts of what might have been, that's a vulnerable place to operate from. Reynolds turned to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. Did you know Emma makes her own lunch? Has since she was 5. She checks her mother's medication schedule and knows how to navigate hospital billing departments. He shook his head. She's 7, James. And Lily would have been 19 this year, James said softly. The silence that followed was answer. Enough. After James left, Reynolds opened his desk drawer and retrieved the silver frame again. Caroline's laughing face looked back at him as she held 2-year-old Lily on her lap. What would you think of my becoming involved in this situation? He asked the photograph. Am I seeing ghosts or an opportunity to finally do something right? As always, the photograph offered no answers, only memories of what he'd lost and the crushing weight of how he'd failed them. The intercom buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. Sir, Rebecca Harrison is here. She was released from the hospital this morning and asked to see you. Reynolds carefully returned the photograph to its drawer. Send her in. What happened next would determine whether his executive team's concerns were justified or whether something extraordinary was beginning. Rebecca Harrison stood in Reynolds' office, significantly improved from her hospital appearance, but still bearing the pallor of recent illness. She wore a simple navy blue suit, clearly her best, though several years out of current fashion. Mr. Reynolds, she began, her voice steady despite her evident nervousness, I came to thank you personally for your kindness toward Emma and for handling the hospital bills. I'll arrange a repayment plan. Please sit. Reynolds gestured to the chair across from him. No repayment is necessary. Consider it an investment. Rebecca sat, her posture perfect despite her discomfort. An investment requires returns, Mr. Reynolds. I haven't proven my value yet. Your daughter has been quite the ambassador, he replied with unexpected warmth. The marketing team is implementing her color suggestions, and the break room staff has added chocolate milk to the regular order. A smile briefly brightened Rebecca's tired face. Emma has that effect on people. She's always been able to talk to anyone. Her expression grew serious. But I need to apologize for putting you in this position. She was supposed to call and reschedule the interview, not attend it herself. Yet here we are, Reynolds observed. Sometimes the most significant opportunities arise from broken protocols. He studied her for a moment. Your official interview is scheduled for Monday, but I'd like to discuss something different today. Rebecca tensed slightly. Of course, Reynolds leaned forward. Why do you continue pursuing corporate positions when they've repeatedly rejected you because of your family situation? The blunt question hung in the air between them. Rebecca's eyes flashed with momentary anger, then determination. Because I refuse to let my daughter believe that being a mother makes me less valuable professionally. Because I'm excellent at what I do, regardless of my personal circumstances. She straightened in her chair. And frankly, because I need comprehensive health insurance more than inspirational workplace culture, or ping-pong tables in the break room. Reynolds nodded slowly. Practical priorities. I respect that. He paused, then asked, if hired, how would you handle the inevitable emergencies, Emma's illnesses, school closures? The same way I've always handled them, with contingency plans and backup systems, Rebecca answered without hesitation. I maintain relationships with 3 reliable babysitters, 2 after-school programs, and a network of other working parents for emergencies. She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Reynolds, I understand your concerns. Every employer has them. But what they fail to recognize is that single parents are the most efficient workers you'll ever find. We don't have time for office politics or extended lunches. We prioritize ruthlessly and maximize every minute because we have to. Reynolds studied her, impressed by her candor. Then he made a decision that would change Meridian's culture forever. Ms. Harrison, I'd like to offer you the position with one significant modification to the standard package. He slid a folder across the desk. This outlines a pilot program. I'm implementing flexible work arrangements with emergency childcare support for employees with family responsibilities. Rebecca stared at the folder. You're creating this because of me? No, Reynolds said quietly. I'm creating it because 17 years ago, my wife Caroline tried to return to work after our daughter was born. Every company she approached saw only complications, not her brilliance. He looked directly at Rebecca. I was too absorbed in building Meridian to notice how it destroyed her. The revelation hung in the air between them. What happened? Rebecca asked softly. Reynolds' face darkened with old pain. She was driving to yet another interview when a truck crossed the median. Emma reminds me of what Lily might have become. Understanding dawned in Rebecca's eyes. That's why you helped us. Initially, perhaps, he acknowledged, but your daughter's determination and your qualifications stand on their own merits. He extended his hand. The position is yours if you want it. As Rebecca shook his hand, neither could have predicted how this decision would transform not just their lives, but the lives of countless working parents at Meridian Enterprises in the years to come. 2 months after Rebecca Harrison joined Meridian Enterprises, the company's dynamics had subtly shifted. Rebecca's project management expertise quickly proved invaluable, her methodical approach streamlining operations across multiple departments. The pilot program for flexible work arrangements had expanded beyond her position, with 5 other employees now participating in what Reynolds had officially named the Family Forward Initiative. The quarterly projections show a 12% increase in productivity from participating team members, Rebecca explained during her presentation to the executive board. She stood confidently at the head of the conference table, her slides displaying clear metrics. Retention rates are up, and sick leave usage has actually decreased. Victoria Sloan, the HR director who had initially opposed Rebecca's hiring, watched with thinly veiled skepticism. 2 months is hardly enough time to determine long-term viability, she noted. What happens when the novelty wears off? That's why we're tracking weekly metrics rather than quarterly, Rebecca countered smoothly. We can identify and address issues in real time rather than discovering problems months later. Reynolds observed the exchange with satisfaction. Rebecca had proven herself not just competent but exceptional, deftly navigating corporate politics while delivering consistent results. "The initiative stays," he announced, ending further debate. "Rebecca, expand the program to include 15 more positions by next quarter." Later that afternoon, Reynolds found Emma in what had become her regular spot, a small desk in the corner of Rebecca's office where she worked on homework after school. The arrangement had raised eyebrows initially, but Reynolds had made it clear that children of employees were welcome in designated areas when necessary. "Mr. Reynolds," Emma looked up from her science project. "Mom's helping Mr. Davidson fix the supply chain problem, just like I said." Reynolds smiled. "So I heard. Your mother is quite impressive." "She always was," Emma replied matter-of-factly. "People just didn't notice before." The simple observation struck Reynolds as profoundly true. How many talented individuals had corporate America overlooked because their circumstances didn't fit the traditional mold? "Emma," he said, sitting in the chair beside her desk, "how would you feel about helping me with a special project?" Her eyes widened with interest. "What kind of project?" "I'm thinking about creating a space here at Meridian for children whose parents work late, sort of like a homework and activity center. What would make it a good place for kids your age?" Emma considered this seriously. Books at different reading levels, quiet spaces and group spaces, healthy snacks, not just cookies, even though cookies are the best, and maybe college students to help with homework. Reynolds pulled out his notebook and began writing. "What about during school holidays?" For the next hour, CEO and Child mapped out what would eventually become Meridian's renowned Bridge program, an on-site childcare and educational support system that would revolutionize work-life integration in corporate America. That evening, as Rebecca finished her work, she found Reynolds and Emma deep in conversation, surrounded by drawings and notes. "Should I be concerned about this conspiracy?" she asked with amusement. "Mom, we're designing a kid space for Meridian," Emma exclaimed. Rebecca raised an eyebrow at Reynolds. "That sounds expensive." "It's an investment," he corrected. "One that will pay dividends for years to come." As they walked to the elevator together, Rebecca studied Reynolds's profile. "You've changed since we first met," she observed. "For better or worse?" "Definitely better," she replied. "The staff doesn't call you the machine anymore." Reynolds looked surprised. "You heard about that?" "Office gossip travels fast," Rebecca smiled. "Now they're calling you the revolutionary instead." As the elevator doors closed, Reynolds reflected that some revolutions began not with grand manifestos, but with a child's simple question. Why can't things be different? What no one at Meridian realized was that the company's transformation had attracted unwanted attention from those who preferred the status quo, and they were preparing to strike back. The quarterly board meeting began like any other, with financial reports and strategic planning updates. Alexander Reynolds sat at the head of the table, listening as James Whitfield presented the latest figures. "Overall revenue is up 7% from this time last year," James reported. "Particularly notable is the 22% increase in productivity from departments participating in the Family Forward initiative." Several board members nodded approvingly, but Gerald Harrington, the oldest member of the board and former CEO of Meridian, cleared his throat pointedly. "While these figures are impressive, I've been hearing concerns about company culture," Harrington said, his voice carrying the weight of his 30 years with Meridian. "There's a perception that we're becoming a daycare center rather than a premier financial services firm." Reynolds kept his expression neutral. "Would you care to elaborate?" "Children in the workplace, flexible schedules, remote work options," Harrington listed. "These may appeal to a certain demographic, but our core clients expect stability and tradition. Morgan Stanley isn't bringing sippy cups to client meetings." Victoria Sloan nodded in agreement. "I've had several complaints from senior staff about noise and disruption. Just yesterday, a junior analyst was spotted playing catch with a child in the East Corridor." "That was my daughter," Reynolds said quietly. "The catch was a mathematics game I developed to help with her multiplication tables." The room fell. "Silent." "Alex," Harrington leaned forward, his tone softening to one of paternalistic concern. "No one questions your authority to implement new programs, but there are whispers about your personal investment in the Harrison situation. People are questioning your objectivity. Reynolds felt a familiar coldness settle over him, the emotional armor he'd worn for years before Emma and Rebecca entered his life. My personal investments are irrelevant. The metrics speak for themselves, he replied evenly. If our goal is maximizing shareholder value, the initiative has proven its worth. The tension in the room eased slightly, but Reynolds knew this was merely the opening salvo in what would become a prolonged battle. After the meeting, James lingered behind. Gerald's not alone in his concerns, Alex. Victoria's been gathering ammunition, documenting every minor incident involving children on the premises, tracking any project delays from flexible workers. Let her, Reynolds replied. The data supports our position. This isn't just about data, James warned. It's about power and perception. Gerald still has significant influence with the older board members. They see these changes as a rejection of the company they built. Reynolds gathered his papers. Perhaps it's time the company they built evolved. That evening, Reynolds found himself driving to Rebecca's modest townhouse in Lincoln Park instead of heading home to his penthouse. He'd been invited for dinner, a simple thank you for his mentorship of Emma, Rebecca had insisted. The domestic scene that greeted him was a stark contrast to the corporate battlefield he'd left behind. Emma answered the door, proudly wearing an apron and announcing she'd helped make the lasagna. The small home was warm and cluttered with evidence of a life fully lived, books stacked on end tables, a science project taking up half the dining table, framed artwork clearly created by Emma's hand. Sorry about the mess, Rebecca apologized, emerging from the kitchen. We weren't expecting the science fair project to involve quite so much. Expansion. It's a volcano, Emma explained excitedly. It actually erupts. Reynolds found himself smiling genuinely. I'll be sure to stand back during the demonstration. During dinner, he found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did. The conversation flowed easily from Emma's school adventures to Rebecca's projects at work, without the careful calculation that characterized most of his interactions. You're different here, Rebecca observed after Emma had gone to finish homework. More human. Reynolds considered this. I've spent decades cultivating a specific professional persona. It becomes habit. It becomes armor, she corrected gently. I recognize it because I've worn similar protection. Single mom in corporate America. You develop a shell. Something about her perception unsettled and comforted him simultaneously. The board is pushing back against the changes, he admitted. They're using you and Emma as evidence that I've lost objectivity. Rebecca's expression tightened. I can request a transfer to another department. Distance myself from the initiative? Absolutely not, Reynolds interrupted. That would validate their criticism. We proceed as planned. What he didn't say, couldn't articulate even to himself, was how unacceptable he found the idea of Rebecca and Emma moving further from his daily orbit. Just be prepared, he warned. Corporate politics can turn vicious quickly. Rebecca's smile held unexpected steel. Mr. Reynolds, I've been a single mother for 7 years. There's nothing corporate America can throw at me that's more challenging than raising a child alone while working full-time. As he drove home later, Reynolds realized he'd shared more about the board's inner workings with Rebecca than he had with most executives. More troubling was the realization that the prospect of losing his professional reputation, something that had once been his primary concern, paled in comparison to the thought of losing the tentative connection he'd formed with Rebecca and Emma. He was still contemplating this shift when his phone rang with news that would accelerate the coming conflict beyond anyone's expectations. Mr. Reynolds, you need to see this immediately. Janet's voice carried unusual urgency as she placed a tablet on his desk the following morning. The headline from the Wall Street Journal's business section blared, Meridian CEO's Personal Crusade, Business Innovation or Midlife Crisis. The accompanying article featured quotes from anonymous sources within Meridian, describing Reynolds' unusual attachment to a female employee and her child, and questioning whether his judgment had been compromised by unresolved personal trauma. The article specifically mentioned the Family Forward initiative, painting it as a costly distraction from Meridian's core business, driven by Reynolds' personal agenda rather than sound business strategy. "Who leaked this?" Reynolds asked, his voice dangerously calm. "Impossible to say for certain," Janet replied, "but the details about your wife and daughter, very few people have access to that information." Reynolds's phone began ringing. Board members, major clients, and industry contacts all demanding explanations. By noon, Meridian's stock had dropped 3 points, and the PR department was in crisis mode. Victoria Sloan appeared at his office. "Jorge," her expression a carefully constructed mask of concern. "The board has called an emergency meeting for 4 p.m. They're requesting your presence and—" She paused meaningfully. "They've specifically asked that Rebecca Harrison attend as well." "On what grounds?" Reynolds demanded. "They didn't share." "That information with me," Victoria replied with practiced innocence. "I'm simply delivering the message." After she left, Reynolds immediately called Rebecca to warn her. "I've already seen the article," she said, her voice tight. "Emma's teacher called me. Some of the parents are discussing it. It's affecting my daughter now, Alexander." The use of his first name, something she'd never done before, registered the seriousness of the situation. "Rebecca, I'm sorry. I never intended—" "I know," she interrupted. "But intention doesn't matter much when my 7-year-old is hearing whispers about her mother's relationship with her boss." The implication struck him like a physical blow. "The article doesn't suggest—" "Not directly," Rebecca agreed. "But it plants the idea. You know how these things work." When they arrived separately at the emergency board meeting, the atmosphere was glacial. Gerald Harrington sat at the center of the table, flanked by Victoria and several of the more conservative board members. James Whitfield sat alone on the opposite side, his presence a silent statement of support for Reynolds. "We'll get straight to the point," Harrington began once everyone was seated. "This morning's article has caused significant damage to Meridian's reputation and shareholder value. Our phones have been ringing all day with concerned clients and investors." Reynolds remained outwardly calm. "Media speculation is hardly unprecedented. Our PR team is already addressing the inaccuracies." "The concern isn't just the media coverage," Victoria interjected smoothly. "It's the underlying issue of judgment and priorities." She turned to Rebecca. "Ms. Harrison, no one questions your professional qualifications. However, the special circumstances of your hiring and the subsequent development of company policy around your personal situation have created a perception problem." Rebecca's spine straightened. "My personal situation being that I'm a single parent, or that my daughter showed remarkable initiative in ensuring her mother didn't miss an opportunity? Which aspect exactly is problematic for Meridian's image?" Several board members shifted uncomfortably. "The issue," Harrington continued, "is the appearance of favoritism and the rapid implementation of policies that fundamentally alter our corporate culture without proper vetting." He slid a document across the table toward Reynolds. "We're proposing her temporary suspension of the Family Forward Initiative pending comprehensive review and the reassignment of Ms. Harrison to the Cleveland office to eliminate any appearance of impropriety." Reynolds didn't touch the document. "Reassignment would be constructive dismissal, and you know it. Her daughter is established in school here." "We would, of course, provide relocation assistance," Victoria added. Rebecca's voice cut through the tension. "May I ask who leaked the personal information about Mr. Reynolds' family tragedy to the press?" The room fell silent. "That's not relevant to these proceedings," Harrington replied stiffly. "I disagree," Rebecca countered. "It speaks directly to the ethical standards of this board. Someone in this room used deeply personal information as a weapon in a corporate power struggle. That seems extremely relevant to how Meridian conducts business." James Whitfield leaned forward. "I agree with Ms. Harrison. Before we discuss any policy changes or personnel reassignments, we should address the breach of confidentiality that precipitated this crisis." Victoria's perfectly composed facade cracked slightly. "We have no evidence that anyone on the board—" "Actually," Reynolds interrupted, "we do." He nodded to Janet, who had been standing quietly by the door. She distributed copies of an email chain to each board member. "This morning, IT traced the source of the leak. The information was sent from Victoria's email account to a journalist at the Wall Street Journal 3 days ago." All eyes turned to Victoria, whose face had drained of color. "This is preposterous," she sputtered. "My email was obviously hacked. By someone who knew your authentication details and had access to confidential personnel files, Reynolds asked mildly. That seems unlikely. For the first time since the meeting began, Reynolds allowed himself a small smile. I anticipated this maneuver, though not quite so soon. The email contains metadata that confirms its authenticity and origin. Victoria, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you to clear your office. Harrington's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You can't unilaterally fire an executive without board approval. Actually, I can, Reynolds corrected. Ethics violations of this magnitude fall under my direct authority as CEO, unless, of course, you were involved as well, Gerald? The older man deflated visibly. Of course not. I would never— Good, Reynolds interrupted. Then, as acting chairman, I move that we conclude this emergency meeting and reconvene tomorrow after everyone has had time to review the evidence properly. As the board members filed out, some looking shell-shocked and others secretly pleased at Victoria's downfall, Rebecca remained seated. You knew this was coming, she observed once they were alone. Reynolds nodded. I suspected Victoria would make a move eventually. She's opposed every progressive policy change for years, not just the ones involving you. Why didn't you warn me? There was hurt beneath her professional composure, because your genuine reaction was crucial. If you'd been prepared, someone might have suspected collusion. He hesitated. I am sorry about the impact on Emma, though, that I didn't anticipate. Rebecca gathered her papers. She's stronger than you think, than anyone thinks. She paused at the door. For what it's worth, I believe in what you're trying to build here, a company where success doesn't require sacrificing family. It's long overdue. As she left, Reynolds realized that the corporate victory felt hollow compared to the personal trust he might have damaged. The battle had been won, but the war, both professional and personal, was far from over. 3 weeks after Victoria's dismissal, the controversy had mostly subsided. Meridian's stock had recovered. The media had moved on to fresher scandals. And the Family Forward initiative had not only continued, but expanded to include 25 positions across various departments. Rebecca's management of the program had been exemplary, with comprehensive metrics tracking both productivity and employee satisfaction. Even former skeptics on the board had begun to acknowledge the business case for the initiative, particularly as competing firms began implementing similar programs to keep pace with Meridian's innovation. Everything was proceeding smoothly until the day Gerald Harrington walked into Reynolds' office unannounced, closing the door firmly behind him. We need to talk, Alex, he said without preamble, about your future with Meridian. Reynolds leaned back in his chair. I wasn't aware my future was in question. Harrington placed a thick folder on the desk between them. The board has been conducting a review of company leadership and succession planning, standard procedure for any corporation of our size. And, Reynolds prompted, though he already sensed where this was heading, and there are concerns about your long-term vision for Meridian. The changes you've implemented recently, while well-intentioned, represent a significant departure from the company's established identity. Reynolds opened the folder to find a formal proposal for his transition to an advisory role over the next 6 months, with Harrington returning as interim CEO while a search for permanent leadership was conducted. I see, Reynolds said quietly. A carefully orchestrated coup. Harrington had the grace to look uncomfortable. That's unnecessarily dramatic, Alex. No one questions your contributions to Meridian. The company has thrived under your leadership for 15 years. But perhaps it's time for what, Gerald? A return to the policies of the past, discarding innovations that are demonstrably improving both our bottom line and our employees' lives? For balance, Harrington corrected. For ensuring that in your personal journey of healing, you don't reshape an entire corporation around your individual regrets. The words struck with precision, finding the vulnerability Reynolds had carefully concealed. My personal journey is irrelevant, he replied coldly. The metrics support every change I've implemented. Harrington sighed. Numbers aren't everything, Alex. Culture matters. Tradition matters. The expectations of our long-standing clients matter. He paused. And your relationship with the Harrison family has created complications that extend beyond metrics. I don't have a relationship with the Harrison family, Reynolds countered, though even to his own ears, the denial sounded hollow. Don't you? Harrington asked quietly. You've been photographed at the child's school events, you've had dinner at their home multiple times. You've created an entire corporate initiative that began with accommodating their specific situation. I've supported a valuable employee and recognized the potential for broader application of that support, Reynolds corrected. Any personal connection is secondary. Harrington studied him for a long moment. The board meeting is Friday at 2 p.m. You have until then to consider the transition proposal. If you fight this, Alex, it will get ugly. The press will dig deeper. Into your personal history, into your interest in the Harrisons. Do you really want Emma caught in that crossfire again? After Harrington left, Reynolds sat motionless, considering his options. He could fight. He still had allies on the board, and the performance numbers were on his side. But Harrington was right about one thing. A public battle would inevitably draw Rebecca and Emma back into the spotlight. As if summoned by his thoughts, there was a gentle knock at his door, and Emma peeked in. "Mr. Reynolds, Mom said I could show you my science fair results." She bounded in, carrying a blue ribbon and photographs of her volcanic eruption experiment. For the next 15 minutes, Reynolds listened attentively as Emma explained the chemical reactions involved in her project, her face alight with enthusiasm for discovery. The corporate machinations that had occupied his morning seemed distant and somehow less consequential in the face of her uncomplicated joy. "Emma," he said when she paused for breath, "what would you think if I wasn't working at Meridian anymore?" Her expression grew serious. "Are you going to a different company?" "I might," he answered honestly, "or I might start something new." Emma considered this carefully. "Would we still see you? Mom says you're her mentor, but I think you're our friend too." The simple question crystallized the decision he'd been avoiding for weeks. His position at Meridian, the company he'd built, the professional identity he'd cultivated for decades, suddenly seemed less essential than the connection he'd formed with this remarkable child and her mother. "Yes," he said firmly. "We would definitely still see each other." Later that evening, Reynolds called Rebecca. "I need to discuss something important. Can we meet tomorrow?" "Is this about Harrington's ultimatum?" she asked, surprising him with her awareness. "How did you know?" "The executive floor has thin walls and Janet keeps me informed," Rebecca replied. "She's quite protective of you." Reynolds smiled despite himself. "Apparently I'm the last to know about the coup then." "Not a coup yet," Rebecca corrected. "Just an attempted one." She paused. "Alexander, whatever you're planning, please don't make decisions based on protecting Emma and me. We've survived corporate politics before. It's not just about protecting you," he admitted. "It's about deciding what matters more, the company I've built or the future I could build." The silence between them held possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. "Come for dinner tomorrow," Rebecca finally said. "Emma's making her famous spaghetti. We can talk after she goes to bed." As Reynolds hung up, he realized that for the first time since losing Caroline and Lily, he was making decisions based not on past regrets, but on future hopes. Whatever happened with Meridian, something fundamental had shifted in his life's orientation. From looking back to looking forward, what he couldn't possibly know was that the following day would bring a revelation that would change everything. The manila envelope arrived by courier at 10:37 a.m., marked personal and confidential, for Alexander Reynolds. Janet placed it on his desk with a curious glance, but asked no questions, one of the many reasons he valued her discretion. Inside, Reynolds found documents from Gerald Harrington's private files, copies of board meeting minutes from 18 years ago, personnel records and internal memos. A post-it note simply read, "You should know what you're really fighting against." A friend. As Reynolds read through the materials, his hands began to shake. The documents revealed a systematic policy implemented during Harrington's tenure as CEO, one that specifically targeted the hiring and retention of women of childbearing age, particularly those already with children. One memo from Harrington to the then HR director read, "While we cannot explicitly discriminate, we can implement performance metrics that naturally disadvantage those with family obligations. This ensures our workforce remains focused and unencumbered. Another document showed a list of female employees who had become pregnant while at Meridian, with notations tracking their eventual departures, all within 18 months of returning from maternity leave. The pattern was undeniable and deliberate. Most disturbing was a specific mention of Caroline Reynolds in a board presentation from 2 decades earlier. Wife of our CFO, Alexander Reynolds, has requested part-time return from maternity leave. Recommend? Denial, as it would set problematic precedent for executive spouses. Reynolds sat back, memories crashing over him like waves. Caroline's increasing frustration as she'd tried to return to work after Lily's birth. Her depression when firm after firm rejected her flexible work proposals. The arguments they'd had when he'd suggested she simply stay home with Lily, like other executives' wives. The final document in the package was a newspaper clipping about the accident that had killed Caroline and Lily, with a handwritten note in what appeared to be Harrington's writing. Tragic outcome. Ensure AR remains focused on work. Best distraction from grief. Reynolds' vision blurred with a combination of rage and grief. All these years he'd blamed himself for being too absorbed in building Meridian to support Caroline properly. He'd never considered that his mentor, Harrington, had actively blocked her professional return. When Rebecca called to confirm dinner plans, Reynolds' voice was strange enough to concern her. "What's happened?" she asked immediately. "I need to show you something," he replied. "Can you meet me at the office first? It's important." An hour later, Rebecca sat across from him, the damning documents spread between them on his desk. "This is," she began, then faltered. "Systematic discrimination," Reynolds finished. "Deliberately designed to push out working mothers while maintaining plausible deniability." Rebecca studied the documents carefully, her professional composure giving way to visible anger. "And Harrington was behind this? The same man who's trying to oust you for being too progressive? Not just behind it, he created it, implemented it, and apparently took pride in its effectiveness." Reynolds met her eyes. "Including with my wife, Caroline." Understanding dawned in Rebecca's expression. "That's why this has been so personal. For you? The Family Forward initiative isn't just about efficiency or even doing the right thing. It's about redemption," Reynolds admitted quietly. "Correcting a wrong I didn't even know existed until today." Rebecca reached across the desk, briefly touching his hand, the first time she had initiated physical contact between them. "Alexander, this changes everything. The board needs to see these documents." "Harrington has too many allies," Reynolds countered. "They'll claim these are old policies, no longer relevant. They'll minimize and rationalize." "Then we don't just show the board," Rebecca said, determination hardening her voice. "We show everyone." "What do you mean?" "Transparency," she explained. "Complete corporate transparency about past failures and current corrections. We publish a comprehensive report on Meridian's historical practices regarding working parents, acknowledge the failures, and detail the measurable improvements under the Family Forward initiative." Reynolds considered the implications. That would be unprecedented. "Exactly," Rebecca nodded. "No corporation willingly exposes its past mistakes this way. By doing so, we position Meridian not as perfect, but as courageously committed to progress. It's not just corporate policy, it becomes a movement." As they discussed strategy late into the afternoon, Reynolds found himself admiring not just Rebecca's professional insight, but her moral clarity. She approached the situation not as a victim of discrimination, but as a strategist determined to create systemic change. "There's one more thing," Reynolds said as they prepared to leave for dinner. "These documents don't just change how we approach the board meeting. They change my understanding of the past 17 years of my life." Rebecca studied his face. "What will you do with that understanding?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but for the first time since losing them, I feel like I might be on the path Caroline would have wanted." That evening at Rebecca's townhouse, Reynolds watched as Emma proudly served her spaghetti dinner, complete with garlic bread she'd helped prepare. The domestic scene struck him with an unexpected poignancy. This was what he'd missed all these years, what he'd walled himself off from after losing his family. After Emma went to bed, Rebecca poured 2 glasses of wine and joined Reynolds on the small balcony overlooking the neighborhood park. "Tomorrow will be challenging," she said quietly. "Harrington won't go down without a fight." "I'm prepared for that," Reynolds replied. "What I'm less prepared for is what comes after." Rebecca turned to face him fully. "What do you mean?" Reynolds chose his words carefully. "For 17 years I've defined myself by what I lost and by what I built to distract from that loss. Meridian became my identity because I had nothing else." He paused. "But these past few months, watching you with Emma, being included in your lives, I've started to remember there are other ways to measure success." "Alexander," Rebecca began cautiously, "whatever happens with Meridian, you've created real change. That will help countless families. That matters." "It does," he agreed. "But I'm beginning to think that what matters more is being present for the people in front of you, not just building systems that might help anonymous families in the future." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but increasingly clear. "We should focus on tomorrow's battle first," Rebecca finally said, though her eyes held questions about possibilities beyond the corporate conflict. Reynolds nodded, respecting her careful boundaries. "You're right, one transformation at a time." As he prepared to leave, Emma appeared in the hallway in her pajamas, ostensibly for a glass of water but clearly curious about the adult conversation. "Mr. Reynolds," she said with the directness only children truly master, "are you going to be okay? You look worried." Reynolds knelt to her level. "I am a little worried about a meeting tomorrow, but having you and your mom on my side makes me much braver." Emma considered this seriously before declaring, "Mum says that when you're worried about something big, you should remember that most things look different in the morning." The simple wisdom made Reynolds smile. "Your mum is very smart." "I know," Emma agreed confidently. Then with childlike intuition, she added, "She likes you too, you know. She smiles more when you're here." As Rebecca gently shooed her daughter back to bed with an embarrassed glance at Reynolds, he realized that whatever happened at tomorrow's board meeting, the most significant transformation had already occurred, not in corporate policy, but in his own heart. The man who would walk into Meridian Enterprises the next morning was fundamentally different from the isolated, driven executive who had encountered a determined 7-year-old in his lobby just a few months earlier. He just hoped that difference would be enough to win the coming battle. The Meridian Enterprises boardroom fell silent as Alexander Reynolds concluded his presentation. The evidence of Harrington's discriminatory policies lay before each board member, decades of systematic exclusion methodically documented and impossible to deny. "For 17 years, Reynolds said, his voice steady but charged with emotion, "I believed I had failed my wife Caroline by being too focused on building this company. Today I learned that the real failure was institutional, a deliberate policy, designed by Mr. Harrington to eliminate working mothers from our workforce." Harrington's face had grown increasingly ashen as Reynolds revealed document after document. "These are historical practices," he protested weakly. "Times were different. Were they?" Rebecca interrupted, standing beside Reynolds at the head of the table. "Or did you simply make sure they stayed the same?" She distributed additional reports showing the Family Forward Initiative's remarkable success metrics. "The evidence shows that supporting working parents doesn't diminish productivity, it enhances it." James Whitfield cleared his throat. "I move that we formally adopt the Family Forward Initiative as permanent company policy, and that we expand it across all Meridian offices nationwide." "I second," said Martina Chen, a usually quiet board member who had been watching the proceedings, with growing resolve. "And I further move that Gerald Harrington be removed from the board effective immediately." Harrington surged to his feet. "This is preposterous. I built this company on exclusion and prejudice." Reynolds finished for him. "Times have changed, Gerald. Meridian has changed." The vote was decisive, 11-3 in favor of removing Harrington and permanently implementing the initiative. As security escorted the former CEO from the building, Reynolds felt a weight lifting, not just the immediate threat to his position, but a deeper burden he'd carried since losing Caroline and Lily. Later that afternoon, as the news of Meridian's groundbreaking new policies hit the financial press, Reynolds found himself alone in his office, staring at the photograph of Caroline and Lily. For the first time in 17 years, he spoke to them without guilt clouding his words. "I think you would have approved," he said softly. "It took me far too long, but maybe some good has come from losing you after all." A gentle knock interrupted his thoughts. Rebecca stood in the doorway, Emma beside her. "We brought celebration cupcakes," Emma announced, holding up a box from the bakery down the street. "Mom says you won the big fight." Reynolds smiled. "We did. Together." As Emma arranged cupcakes on his conference table with solemn concentration, Rebecca joined Reynolds by the window. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Professionally? We implement the initiative nationwide, then industry-wide. I've already had calls from 3 competing firms asking for consultation." He turned to face her fully. "Personally, that's a more complicated question." Rebecca's eyes held his. "Is it?" Reynolds took a deep breath. "For 17 years I've lived in the past, building Meridian as a monument to what I'd lost rather than as a foundation for something new." He glanced at Emma, now carefully dividing napkins. "You and Emma reminded me that life continues, that there can be second chances if we're brave enough to take them." "Are you?" Rebecca asked softly. "Brave enough?" In answer, Reynolds reached into his pocket and withdrew a small wrapped package. This was Caroline's. She would have wanted someone like you to have it, someone who fights for the same things she believed in. Rebecca unwrapped the package to find a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a compass. She always said a woman needed her own direction, not one set by others, Reynolds explained. It seems fitting now. As Rebecca touched the bracelet with gentle fingers, Emma bounded over. "Are you guys having a serious talk? Your faces look serious." Reynolds knelt to her level. "Actually, I was wondering if you and your mum might like to help me with a new project." Emma's eyes brightened. "Like the kid space we designed?" "Even bigger," Reynolds smiled. "I'm thinking about starting a foundation, one that helps companies create better workplaces for families. We'd need a chief testing officer to make sure our ideas actually work for kids." "I could do that," Emma exclaimed. "I thought you might." Reynolds agreed, looking up at Rebecca. "And we'd need a brilliant executive director who understands both corporate structure and family needs." Rebecca's eyes widened. "You're serious about this?" "Completely," Reynolds confirmed. "The Reynolds Family Foundation, focused on transforming workplace culture nationwide." "Reynolds Family Foundation," Emma repeated thoughtfully. "Does that mean we'd be part of your family?" The innocent question hung in the air, laden with meaning beyond a 7-year-old's understanding. Rebecca blushed. "Emma, that's not—" "Not yet," Reynolds interrupted gently, surprising himself with the words. "But families come together in many different ways over time." 1 year later to the day, the Reynolds Family Foundation celebrated its official launch in the same lobby where Emma had first approached the reception desk with her mother's portfolio. Now, hundreds of business leaders gathered to learn about implementing family-forward policies in their own companies. Alexander Reynolds stood at the podium, Rebecca beside him as executive director, and Emma proudly passing out program brochures to attendees. "One unexpected visitor changed everything," Reynolds told the crowd. "A 7-year-old girl taught a room full of executives what true courage looks like." He smiled at Emma, now standing between him and Rebecca. "She reminded us that family isn't a liability in the workplace. It's our greatest asset and our ultimate purpose." As applause filled the atrium, Reynolds took Rebecca's hand, the silver compass bracelet catching the light as their fingers intertwined. The gold band on her left hand, a recent addition, matched the one on his. "Ready for this new adventure?" he asked quietly. Rebecca smiled, leaning into his shoulder as Emma wrapped her arms around them both. "We've been ready since the day she walked into your lobby. Sometimes the most important meetings of our lives come disguised as interruptions. Sometimes our greatest opportunities arrive in unexpected packages. And sometimes, just sometimes, a child's simple courage can heal wounds we thought would last forever.